My Billionaire Mom, Chapter 1. Get up. A cold voice rang in Chuck Cannon's ears. The next second, the quilt on him was completely lifted. Chuck rubbed his eyes and looked at the woman. He sighed and felt a little uncomfortable. The beautiful woman in front of him was Yvette Jordan, who was 4 or 5 years older than Chuck. She was adopted by Chuck's grandfather and was groomed to be his bride since young. But since his grandfather's death, her attitude towards Chuck had become more and more terrible. You useless piece of trash. Your face even pisses me off. Chuck frowned and tried not to take Yvette's words to heart. Let me tell you, I have done my best to support you. If you don't behave yourself, I will chase you out of this house. Chuck put on his clothes and clenched his fists. But you are my wifey. No, I'm not. It was your grandfather who forced me to marry you. Did he ever ask me if I agreed? If I had a choice, how could I marry a good-for-nothing like you? Chuck stood in front of Yvette. Wifey, don't call me wifey. I'll warn you for the last time. The money you used to eat and drink now is all mine. If you dare to call me wifey again, I'll let you die on the streets. Yvette snorted coldly and looked at Chuck with disdain. But I'm sure that a trash like you won't be able to survive on the streets for long. Since Grandpa left, such humiliation was no longer strange to Chuck. His fragile self-esteem had been almost crushed by Yvette. Sometimes Chuck even doubted whether he really was a piece of trash. Wife. Yvette, I don't have any money. Chuck took a deep breath. He was just a freshman this year, and Yvette was not only a university lecturer but also owned a company. She was a rich person. Look at yourself. You look like a beggar. It's disgusting. Yvette looked at Chuck disgustedly. Then she took out $200 from her bag and threw it on the ground. She turned around and left. Looking at the money on the ground, Chuck clenched his fists. In the end, he didn't pick up the money. He walked out of the house with his remaining self-esteem. Yvette's BMW drove out of the garage as Chuck stood by the roadside and watched. He was in the same university as Yvette, so they were heading in the same direction. However, Yvette's car didn't stop and drove past Chuck. Get out of here and take the bus. A piece of trash doesn't deserve to ride in my car. After saying that, Yvette stepped on the accelerator and left. Chuck gritted his teeth and looked at the BMW that had disappeared at the end of the road. His eyes were slightly red. Yvette, you've gone too far. He was penniless now. His lunch money these days was borrowed from his classmates, and today was the day for him to return the money. Unfortunately, the $200 were too burdensome, and he couldn't pick it up. When he arrived at school, his worst fears came true. As soon as he walked to the school gate, Chuck happened to meet a student who lent money to him. Laura Jean was buying milk tea outside the school gate. When she saw Chuck, who was in a state of loss, she reached out and said, "Chuck, it's time to pay back the money, isn't it?" Chuck wanted to bury himself out of shame. He scratched his hair and said with embarrassment, "Well, give me one more day. I'll do part-time work. I'll pay you back the money latest by tomorrow." "No. How long have you been delaying? You have to return the money to me today," Laura said coldly, with no room for negotiation in her tone. Chuck sighed, "But I really don't have any money now." "You don't have money? Ask your parents for it. Are you an orphan?" Chuck clenched his fists tightly. For as long as he could remember, he had been living with his grandfather. He had never seen his parents before. However, being called an orphan by Laura made him feel even more uncomfortable. "You're really an orphan? Well, I'll give you an extension until this afternoon, but you have to pay me $400. If you don't pay me back, I'll ask my boyfriend to bring someone to deal with you." Laura warned and left. Chuck stood still. He was extremely sad. He had enough of such humiliation. Just as Chuck was thinking about what part-time job he was going to do, his phone rang. Chuck looked at the caller ID and saw it was a foreign number. He was afraid it was a scam. However, when he thought of the online recruitment of mercenaries in Syria that was quite popular recently, offering $8,000 a day, he became interested. Although he knew it could be a scam, if it was true, he would definitely go.
Hello.
Unexpectedly, a flurry of words in Mandarin came from the other end of the phone. "Chucky, I am your mother." Chuck was stunned. At first, he felt that someone was making fun of him, but then he felt extremely sad. How could he have a mother? "Chucky, don't blame me. I had no choice but to go abroad all these years. But now I can finally return home. I will try my best to make up for the lost time with you. I will transfer $5 million, and you can use it first. If it is all spent, call me." The call ended in a strange atmosphere. As soon as it ended, a message arrived. "Your account with the ending number 0123 has been credited with $5 million. The current balance is $5,083. Chuck was dumbfounded. His mother, whom he had never seen before, actually gave him $5 million? He looked at the text message and counted the zeros again and again. He confirmed it more than a dozen times, and then went to the ATM to check. It was true. He was ecstatic. That was $5 million. What's more, it was his mysterious mother who casually gave him pocket money. Even Yvette, who was busy with her business, had less than $1 million including her car and savings. Chuck giggled and walked to campus. At this time, Yvette, who was going to the public building for class, saw Chuck and said with disgust, "Why aren't you in class? Why are you laughing here like a fool? I'm not going to class anymore." Chuck watched Yvette quietly. Yvette felt a little strange. She seemed to see a confident look in Chuck's eyes. Wasn't he still the useless piece of trash? How dare he talk back to her? Yvette was angry. "How dare you talk back to me? If you have the guts, don't come to my house today." Chuck was also tired of being treated coldly by Yvette. "I'm not going back. I'll sleep elsewhere." Is this a joke? Now that I have $5 million, I don't need to look at Yvette's unhappy face anymore. "You? Great. I'd like to see how brave you are. From now on, if you dare to enter my house again, I'll break your legs." Chuck ignored Yvette and turned to leave. Yvette stomped her feet angrily but couldn't do anything about it, so she turned and went to class. Chuck took a taxi to the real estate agency in the city center. With this sum of money, the first thing Chuck wanted to do was have his own house. When he entered, the real estate employees did not pay attention to Chuck, who was dressed ordinarily. They assumed he was either looking for a job, begging, or just enjoying the air conditioning. Later, when the manager came out of the office, the lazy employees suddenly stood up and asked, "Sir, what do you need?" "To buy a house." "To buy a house?" Natalie Xavier's big eyes narrowed. She stared at Chuck carefully for a long time. She had been a real estate agent for a while and had rarely misjudged anyone. Maybe 1 in 1,000 people under 20 bought houses, but they were usually in branded suits and drove luxury cars. "Sir, for your information, the cheapest house in the city is around $12,000 per square meter. Are you sure you want to buy?" Natalie's tone became impatient.